born in Torrington, Connecticut in 1800, the same year that Nat Turner, who started the largest slave revolt in history in 1831 in Southampton, Virginia. Both of them were revolutionary people. And both of them believed in one goal, the overthrow of slavery by any means necessary.
As a young boy, Brown witnessed the brutal beating of a slave his own age with an iron shovel. And from then on, he vowed it was his duty to help the slaves escape. In 1825, shortly before he left Ohio for Pennsylvania, he got his chance.
There came one night a fugitive slave and his wife to father's door, sent perhaps by some townsman who knew John Brown's compassion for such wayfarers, then but few. They were the first colored people I had seen, John Brown, Jr.
John Brown was a man of principle. A strict Calvinist, he held Bible readings, hosted debates, and established the township's first school in his home, trading responsibility with the Delamaters, who shared his anti-slavery views. He insisted in taking the lead on all things, whether it was in laying out new roads or importing cattle. In 1848, President John Quincy Adams appointed him postmaster, a position he held for 7 years. As postmaster, farmer, and surveyor, Brown crisscrossed the countryside, learning the names of people he could trust. Sometimes among the wagon loads of mail, or sturdy instruments, or tanned animal hides, there would be other goods heading north. John Brown made regular trips to Jamestown, New York, and to Meadville, a small frontier community along the banks of French Creek, where he met up with other anti-slavery men.
On one occasion, John Brown went to Mr. Reynolds and told him that he had 7 or 8 more runaways than he could accommodate, and that he wanted to send word to Taylor Randolph to send up a team and get them. Fearing to arouse suspicion by going himself or having a man, they sent an informant, then a schoolgirl of 12.
Not only committed as they were to human freedom, but was also committed as they were to equality, equal rights.
I have for years been trying to devise some way to get a school a-going here for blacks, and I think that on many accounts it would be a most favorable location. If young blacks of our country once become enlightened, it would most assuredly operate on slavery like firing powder confined in a rock. John Brown.
The school would never materialize, and he would never adopt a black child. Brown's financial affairs began to unravel, and death descended on the family. He moved back to Ohio in 1835. John Brown's clash with pro-slavery settlers in Kansas and his raid at Harper's Ferry would be 20 more years in the making. To some, he would become a cold-blooded killer. To others, an avenging angel. John Brown was executed for treason in 1859, 16 months before a civil war would tear the country apart.
Human purposes grow slowly and in curious ways. Thought by thought, they build themselves until in their full panoply, vigor, and definite outline, not even the thinker can tell the exact process of growing, or say that here was the beginning, or there the ending. W.E.B. Du Bois.
The western Pennsylvania settlement known as Liberia never appeared on any maps. Few people knew it existed. But Sandy Lake, carved by a great glacier and surrounded by dense forest, was home to Native American families who lived in harmony with runaway slaves for nearly 25 years. Richard Travis and his friend Job Lawson brought the fugitives from Franklin, 80 miles due north of Pittsburgh on the Allegheny River. They called it Freedom Road.
We're finding across the Midwest and in the Northeast that there were many African American communities that tended to be located in rather rugged areas, away from other established settlements, often on a creek that would lead out of a river, which of course were major corridors for traveling. And these communities were often comprised of freedom seekers or escaped African Americans, and they were often actively involved in assisting people to get to their freedom.
As the years went on, slave catchers began to infiltrate western Pennsylvania on the lookout for runaways or anyone else who matched their description. On a tip from a stranger, 2 Virginia slave owners, accompanied by 2 constables from Pittsburgh, descended upon Sandy Lake's free black community. Not satisfied that their slaves were nowhere to be found, and in fact had left Erie for Canada 2 days earlier, they captured a likely suspect and carried him off, despite a valiant rescue attempt by the local citizens. A Mercer County newspaper condemned the forcible arrest of a free man.
Justice has been smothered, the feelings of the community outraged, and law set at defiance by a band of hired ruffians whose desire for reward has buried beneath it every dictate of humanity.
But in 1850, the law changed, making it even more difficult to protect African Americans in the North. A new Fugitive Slave Act expanded federal powers and gave slaveholders the right to retrieve their slaves, imposing heavy fines and imprisonment on anyone who stood in their way.
This is a dramatic turn. The Constitution itself provides for the return of fugitive slaves. And there is an early fugitive slave law passed by Congress under President Washington in 1793. But by 1850, the South is dissatisfied because it feels like it's not working. The South is losing its property. All that it takes to send a black person, even someone who was freeborn in the North, it takes only an accusation by a white man to say that person was a slave and has escaped. No trial, no evidence.
Fearing prosecution and a return to slavery, most of Sandy Lake's residents fled to Canada. They were not alone. Pittsburgh lost half its black population, more than 900 people, immediately after the law took effect. Underground Railroad activity intensified after 1850. Like the old patriots who wouldn't drink tea because of an unjust tax, Northern abolitionists practiced civil disobedience. They joined the Liberty Party and gathered at places like Zonizers on Mercer's South Pitt Street, where they could buy goods made from free labor.
It brought in other people who ordinarily did not participate in the Underground Railroad. They felt that the Southerners did not have a right to come into the North and to take back their so-called property. So from this fugitive slave law, other people joined and they became abolitionists and agents and station keepers on the Underground Railroad.
They were taken at 3 o'clock in the morning. Mr. Joseph Sykes had a big wagon and took them to Mr. Coutts' next station in Georgetown, now Shapleyville, on their way to Ashtabula, Ohio. If a slave came on foot and late towards morning, he would stay hidden till the next night, when he could get directions and travel on. Elizabeth Kilgore, Breckenridge. Glory, glory, hallelujah. It wasn't the promised land that existed, or so it seemed anyway to the 61 former slaves who arrived in Panamarium on the banks of Indian Run. 24 two-story homes stood neatly in rows, surrounded by orchards and lush farmland. Each family had in its possession a deed for 2 acres and a purse of $1,000. The utopian community was the idea of Dr. Charles Everett, a wealthy physician in Charlottesville, Virginia, who began planning for the liberation of his slaves as early as 1820.
The plan was to have an experimental colony of more than 1,000 acres where African Americans could live as free people.
It took a special act of the Pennsylvania legislature to protect them.
Dr. Everett made a magnanimous bequest. He left more than $1,000 for each slave. The money was used to purchase other family members who were in slavery. For example, one of the slaves by the name of Luke had 22 children. 10 had died in slavery, but he was able to purchase his sons, 2 of his sons.
Even in freedom, the suffering was continuing. The settlers were ill-equipped for harsh northern winters and the spring floods that followed. Some died of pneumonia. Many developed tuberculosis. Some outspoken whites tried to discredit them, stealing from each other and blaming the settlers for their crimes. 2 families relocated to Tennessee. Others retraced their steps into slavery.
The vast majority of slaves wanted to be free and struggled desperately to be free. Many, many did. Some, however, found freedom so difficult and so painful that they opted to return to slavery after they had gained their freedom.
Some say the experiment at Pandemonium failed, but Caroline Richards and her husband George Washington Lewis believed that somewhere among the wasted crops and racial prejudice and harsh winters was a ray of hope for a new generation. Caroline stayed in Pandemonium and raised their 3 children while George fought with the Union Army in the Civil War. It is no coincidence that the founders of the Benevolent Equal Rights Society were black sailors in another war, the War of 1812. In their youth, they worked shoulder to shoulder with white men on Great Lakes battleships. In their prime, they became activists on the Underground Railroad.
Constitution of the Benevolent Equal Rights Society, recorded July 1st, 1858. Whereas in every period of time all civilized nations have been benefited by the institutions of law and order, and the Declaration of Independence declares that all men are created free and equal, and endowed with certain inalienable rights, among which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We, being American-born citizens, and desiring to be law-abiding people, and to be known as such, do for the purpose hereinafter mentioned, ordain and enact the following Constitution.
In the late 18th and early 19th centuries, seafaring represented a level of opportunity that African Americans generally would not find on land. It gave them a place that they could develop skills and work on an equal level with their white counterparts within certain confines.
Black sailors, whether slave or free, earned a measure of respect aboard privateering ships, armed vessels with a license to steal the enemy's merchant ships.
Before they would risk their lives and take on a fight to capture a vessel, they'd take a vote among the crew as to whether this was considered a worthwhile entrepreneurial risk, to risk getting your head or your leg shot off to make some money. And every man in the crew, regardless of their rank in the crew, had a vote, because this was a life and death matter. So you could have a slave who had been rented out by his master to sign on this privateering venture, and his master will collect the profits of this voyage. But this slave has a vote as to whether we're going to fight or not.
And so, these young men came back from their voyages with an extraordinary sense of self-worth. They spun stories of daring escapes and talked openly of Canada and freedom.
Jeffrey Goldston, in his book of 1997, entitled Blackjack, showed the importance of black sailors and how they were able to have a tremendous impact on the free and enslaved black community. They could teach you, and they did, how to travel, how to navigate by the stars, on water as well as on land.
Not only did they provide transportation for fugitives, but they also provided leadership within their communities. In Erie County, they helped establish the Wesleyan Methodist Church,
and other organizations. And they did this in the secluded area known as Jerusalem. Jerusalem was established by abolitionist William Henry.